The metal cuffs bit into her wrists with a sickening, final snap. It was a harsh, unforgiving sound that fractured the quiet uniformity of the suburban night. It wasn't just a physical restraint, it was the acoustic signature of her constitutional rights being violated in the most intimate space imaginable, her own front yard. Judge Aaliyah Vance, cloaked only in an oversized sweatshirt, the material thin against the sharp, unexpected chill of the late night, and house slippers, was kneeling on the cold, damp asphalt of her own driveway. Her usual uniform, the heavy, silk-lined robe that symbolized the absolute authority of the federal judiciary, was hanging in her closet, miles away from this absurd, devastating reality. She wasn't holding a gavel or reviewing a critical constitutional brief. She was holding an empty, lightweight blue recycling bin. The irony was a cold, bitter taste in her mouth, so sharp it threatened to overwhelm the clinical clarity she needed to maintain. For 20 relentless years, she had presided over the bench, deciding the legality of every search, every seizure, every instance of police use of force. Now, she was the subject, the defendant in the most indefensible, egregious abuse of power she had ever encountered. "Ma'am, stop struggling." "I said stop resisting," the patrolman growled, his voice thick with unwarranted, escalating authority, amplified by the still, deep air of the neighborhood. Officer Derek Finch was breathing heavily, his adrenaline spiking, misinterpreting the judge's controlled, motionless defiance for active, aggressive resistance. His perception was already fatally flawed. Resisting what? Aaliyah's voice was steady, perfectly modulated, a tone honed by 2 decades of cross-examination that could dismantle a hostile witness's credibility in 3 precise questions. "I am standing perfectly still with my hands visible. I am not a threat. Your body camera is active, and I demand you state the grounds for this physical restraint. You're being belligerent and argumentative. That constitutes obstruction. Get down now," he commanded, pressing the toe of his heavy patrol boot into the ground next to her knee. The physical intimidation was deliberate, designed to break her composure and force immediate, silent submission. "Officer," she stated, her posture straightening despite the physical proximity of his threat. "I am a sitting federal judge for the United States District Court. You are making a serious, career-ending mistake that crosses the threshold into federal jurisdiction. You have initiated an assault under the color of law." He scoffed, a quick, dismissive burst of air that was the purest sound of unchecked, blinding bias. "I don't care who you think you are, or what kind of badge you think you bought. On the ground. Now." The internal voice, the judge, did not panic. It analyzed. It logged the precise violation, attempted illegal arrest based on subjective hostility, not objective, articulable fact. This is the definition of malicious intent, actionable under 42 U.S.C. 1983. Her mind, despite the pulsing adrenaline, was already drafting the motion. She saw the light glinting off the small, high-definition security camera mounted discreetly beneath the eaves of her garage, a camera she insisted on maintaining after a prior, minor security scare. That camera was the definitive, unblinking witness, ready to deliver the final, devastating testimony against the man standing over her. Officer Finch, trapped in his prejudice, had no idea that the woman he was about to illegally detain had written the book on his constitutional limitations. She had written binding legal precedent on the Fourth Amendment. She had sentenced corrupt police officers to lengthy federal prison terms. And in the freezing darkness of her own driveway, he had just ensured that this sleepy suburban street would soon become the most expensive legal battlefield the city had ever encountered. The money, the $895,000 payout, was now an inevitable, calculable cost, rising exponentially with every subsequent breath he took and every false word he spoke into his radio. Aaliyah did not move, even after the cuffs were secured. Her stillness was a tactical maneuver, a calculated refusal to validate his fabricated aggression. She was mentally isolating the key legal markers, the point where the consensual encounter ended and the illegal detention began. It was the moment Finch blocked her path and demanded ID without reasonable suspicion, transforming her routine chore into a seizure. The woman in her wanted to simply scream her title, end the humiliation, and escape into the warmth and safety of her home. The judge knew that yielding to the unlawful command, even for immediate self-preservation, validated the underlying prejudice that fueled the stop. She was a test case, live-in in progress, and she was determined to use her expertise to expose the system's structural rot, not merely escape its momentary grasp. She recalled the granular details of Terry versus Ohio, the necessity of a reasonable, articulable suspicion of imminent criminal activity to justify a stop. Finch had only suspicious person. An anonymous call of suspicion is merely a vague observation, not a legal trigger for detention. Officer Finch, Aaliyah said again, using his name, a sudden, unsettling personalization of the threat. Your dispatch call was for a suspicious person. That call, alone, is legally insufficient to justify a seizure. You must articulate specific, objective facts that suggest imminent criminal activity occurring at this moment. Finch's face, illuminated by the intermittent glow of the neighborhood lights, was a study in growing, resentful frustration. He was unaccustomed to immediate, unquestioning deference from those he detained. Her legal language was a direct challenge to his authority and his perceived competence. I don't need a lecture on case law, ma'am. I'm investigating. Now, you've been asked repeatedly to comply. Where is your ID, and why are you out here this late? I am under no legal obligation to answer questions or provide identification while standing on my own property without a warrant or reasonable suspicion, she stated, listing the violations for her future lawsuit. You are now attempting to manufacture probable cause where none exists, an action which constitutes official misconduct. Finch, realizing his body camera was recording her repeated and accurate legal assertions, knew he couldn't sustain the obstructing charge without further, physical escalation. He walked back to his cruiser and retrieved his radio, transmitting a request for a check on the registered owner of the property, running the address of the home she was standing in front of. The dispatcher confirmed the owner was Aaliyah Vance. Finch returned, his face a mask of bitter resentment. Aaliyah Vance. Is that your name? It is, she confirmed. Well, Ms. Vance, Finch sneered. I'm still going to need to verify your identity. Prove that you are the person who owns this property. Aaliyah almost closed her eyes at the sheer, blatant absurdity. The property was worth millions. The question wasn't about ownership. It was about worthiness of presence. I have already demonstrated ownership by being here and having the key to the front door. What specific crime, officer, are you now investigating that justifies this continued detention? Finch was trapped. He saw only an aggressive black woman challenging his authority. The fear of appearing weak in front of his eventual backup became his primary motivation. He decided to force compliance, no matter the catastrophic cost to his career. You're being uncooperative. That is interfering with a police investigation. I am now detaining you for probable cause, Finch declared, completing the calculated false report. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The moment he declared the arrest, Aaliyah felt the physical lurch of the power shift, but the analytical clarity remained absolute. Finch had now officially crossed the line from unlawful detention to false arrest and battery. She turned her head slightly to address the body camera mounted on his chest, her voice cutting through the ringing silence of the street. Officer Finch, I am now officially informing you that you have committed an unlawful arrest and battery upon a federal officer. My name is Judge Aaliyah Vance, and my professional credentials are in the pocket of this sweatshirt. You have just guaranteed the end of your career and a massive financial payout from your department. Finch recoiled, his face slack with sudden, horrifying comprehension. The handcuffs were still on her wrists, but his fingers fumbled, reaching into her sweatshirt pocket as requested, retrieving the wallet containing the ultimate, undeniable weapon, the gold-sealed, official United States District Court identification. He looked at the card, the solemn seal, the title, then at the cuffs, then back at her face, which was devoid of any emotion but controlled, devastating fury. The realization hit him with the force of a high-speed collision. He hadn't just made an illegal arrest, he had attacked the institutional authority of the U.S. government. You're a judge, he stammered, the fear radiating off him in palpable waves. I am, Aaliyah confirmed, filling the cold metal press into her skin. And you have violated multiple federal statutes, including civil rights laws that I enforce daily. Call your supervisor, Lieutenant Harris, and tell him exactly what you have done. Do not attempt to fabricate another lie into that radio. The distant sound of the approaching backup cruiser, the one Finch had requested, became audible, its growing siren a soundtrack to his professional demise. The timing was disastrous. Officer Jenkins, the responding officer, pulled up with lights flashing, keyed up for a felony suspect. He jumped out, weapon drawn, only to freeze when he saw his partner, Finch, standing over a woman in handcuffs, staring blankly at a federal judge ID. Lieutenant Harris arrived minutes later in an unmarked sedan, alerted by the dispatcher who had heard Finch's panicked, truncated call. Harris took in the scene. The judge in handcuffs, the panicked Finch, the bewildered Jenkins, and the glaring red, unblinking record light of Aaliyah's home security camera. Harris, a 25-year veteran who knew the catastrophic political implications, immediately ordered the cuffs removed. "Judge Vance, I am Lieutenant Harris." "I am profoundly sorry," Harris said, though his apology felt utterly inadequate against the scope of the violation. Aaliyah rubbed her wrists, restoring circulation, the angry red marks already forming clear lines of evidence. "Lieutenant, I will accept your apology only if you confirm that you will preserve every piece of evidence: the dispatch call, Finch's entire body cam footage, Officer Jenkins' dashcam, and my security footage. I expect this preservation order to be executed before dawn and a copy delivered to the U.S. Marshal's office." Harris, recognizing the tone of absolute judicial command, didn't hesitate. "Consider it done, Judge. Officer Finch, you are relieved of duty effective immediately, pending internal investigation." Finch was escorted away, his head bowed, his career irrevocably over. Aaliyah walked back inside her home, her physical safety restored, but the legal and emotional fight had only just begun. Lieutenant Harris, having failed to contain the crisis in the field, immediately initiated the most extreme damage control protocol. He personally drove Judge Vance back to the precinct in his unmarked sedan, navigating the night streets in silence, the air thick with tension. He bypassed the main entrance, pulling into the private, secured internal bay used for high-value evidence and sensitive arrests. He knew better than to risk parading a federal judge, still visibly shaken, through the public booking area. He escorted Aaliyah directly to his private office, a small, windowless room where the smell of stale coffee and bureaucratic anxiety was overwhelming. Harris immediately began the desperate cleanup attempt. "Judge Vance, I am initiating the formal complaint and evidence collection process now. We are pulling Finch's body camera and the dashcam feed. We will obtain your home security footage with your consent immediately. I will personally supervise the tagging and preservation of all evidence." Aaliyah looked at him, her eyes sharp and unforgiving. "Lieutenant, I was illegally arrested and battered by your subordinate on my own property. I require the presence of my legal counsel and the Chief Judge of the Southern District before I consent to anything further. You are welcome to contact them. Until then, I require silence, a secure phone line, and a written guarantee that I am not, under any circumstances, still considered under arrest or detention." Harris's face hardened with the realization that he was dealing with the full, uncompromising legal and political force of the federal judiciary. He was about to be caught between a rogue officer and the constitutional demands of a federal court. He placed the necessary, terrible calls. The chief judge, alerted by the dispatcher's flagged call, immediately demanded Aaliyah's formal release, citing potential contempt of court and federal civil rights violations. He dispatched a federal marshal to the precinct, not just for protection, but as a silent, armed representation of federal authority ensuring the integrity of the evidence. When the city attorney, Sandra Klein, received the call at 11:30 p.m., her immediate internal audit concluded, "This is an absolute loss. This is a $50 million risk." She ordered Lieutenant Harris to halt all quasi-booking procedures, to treat Aaliyah with the deference due her office, and, most crucially, to not take a written statement from Officer Finch until legal counsel was present, thereby preventing further self-incrimination. While Harris frantically worked the phones, Aaliyah sat alone in his office. She examined her wrists, where the faint, angry red marks from the cuffs were already forming the precise evidence of the battery. She thought about every black man and woman she had seen testify in her courtroom, describing these exact stops, these exact violations, these exact moments of systemic terror. She realized she had not just survived a police stop, she had been given irrefutable evidence, validated by the highest office in the federal system. The federal marshal arrived, a tall, silent man who immediately positioned himself outside Harris's office, standing between the lieutenant and the judge. This final layer of protection solidified the gravity of the situation. Aaliyah Vance was no longer just a citizen. She was a protected federal asset whose civil rights had been flagrantly violated by local law enforcement. It took another hour for the formal release paperwork to be completed, signed by the city attorney's office and the lieutenant, stating clearly that the arrest was made without probable cause and that all charges were voided. Aaliyah accepted the documents, a cold, factual victory, her silence making the lieutenant's repeated apologies feel utterly worthless. She left the precinct, escorted by the federal marshal, the building silent, the officers at their desks staring into their monitors, avoiding all eye contact. Finch's catastrophic mistake had just cost the precinct its internal peace and its public integrity. The moment Judge Aaliyah Vance walked out of the precinct, escorted by a federal marshal, the skirmish ended, and the war began. She did not file a simple complaint. She orchestrated a legal tsunami. Within 48 hours, her former clerk, Marcus Chun, a brilliant civil rights litigator revered for his surgical precision, filed the complaint for declaratory and injunctive relief and damages in federal district court. The complaint was not 45 pages. It was 78 pages, single-spaced, detailing every single procedural and constitutional violation. It was a masterpiece of legal strategy, turning Finch's minimal misconduct into a structural indictment of the entire San Diego Police Department. The claims were clear, undeniable, and universally applicable. Citing Terry v. Ohio and Florida v. Royer, the complaint meticulously detailed how Finch initiated the stop without reasonable suspicion, continued the detention past any point of legal justification, and finally manufactured the charge of obstructing merely to punish the judge for asserting her rights. This claim was crucial. It argued that the stop was motivated by racial bias, profiling a black woman in an affluent neighborhood late at night, and that the department's culture allowed this bias to go uncorrected. This addressed the physical violation, the aggressive grabbing and the tight, painful cuffing, which lacked the predicate of a lawful arrest, thus constituting assault under the color of law. This was the legal nuclear option. It did not target Finch alone, but the city of San Diego and its police department. The Monell claim argued that the violations were not isolated but resulted from a custom, policy, or practice of deliberate indifference, specifically through failure to train, failure to supervise, and failure to correct known patterns of biased behavior. Aaliyah wasn't just seeking personal damages, she was seeking systemic reform mandated by federal law. The city attorney's office, led by Sandra Klein, received the filing and the accompanying evidence, the crystal-clear home security footage and the clean body camera footage, and immediately knew the case was untenable. The visual evidence of a federal judge, clearly stating the law, being cuffed for taking out recycling, left no room for the standard defense of conflicting testimony or qualified immunity. This is not a settlement, it is a surrender negotiation, Klein told the city manager in a closed-door briefing. Judge Vance has provided us with the perfect evidence of institutional failure. She will not only win on liability, but she will obtain punitive damages that could easily top $5 million if this goes to a jury, simply because the victim is a sitting jurist. More critically, the Monell claim will open the floodgates for every past victim of a questionable stop. The true legal battle focused on the discovery phase. Marcus Chun filed a motion for expedited and comprehensive discovery, arguing that the documented video evidence of profiling against a federal officer was an extreme public threat demanding immediate transparency. The motion was granted. The city was compelled to turn over decades of internal affairs, IA, files, statistical analyses of all officer stops, and the full maintenance log of the department's early warning system, EWS. The results were damning, providing the exact proof needed for the Monell claim. The IA files revealed that Officer Finch had been flagged by the EWS 5 times over his 5-year career for a statistically significant disparity in his stops and searches of Black and Hispanic residents. Stops were $3.10 times the department average. Searches were $3.5 times the department average. Each of the 5 flags had been manually overridden by Lieutenant Harris and other supervising officers, who consistently cited Finch's conduct as proactive policing essential for meeting quotas, dismissing the EWS warnings as statistical anomalies. The training manuals, once secret, revealed boilerplate language on Terry's stops but no meaningful instruction on implicit bias or the constitutional parameters of obstructing a non-existent investigation. This discovery was the final nail. The city had indisputable proof that it possessed knowledge of Finch's dangerous, biased pattern and consciously chose to ignore it, thereby creating the very constitutional violation that targeted Judge Vance. The case was no longer about a single officer. It was about the willful indifference of the institution. Fighting the case would not only lose the city millions but would trigger an inevitable Department of Justice civil rights investigation. The city council voted unanimously to halt all litigation and enter immediate, non-negotiable mediation, signaling their complete legal surrender to Judge Vance's demands for structural change. The mediation table was not a place of compromise. It was a venue for the city's capitulation to Judge Vance's demands for systemic justice. Aaliyah, advised by Chun, refused any offer that was not tethered to mandatory institutional reform. She was using the threat of a public jury trial and the looming DOJ investigation as leverage to clean out the system. The final settlement agreement, negotiated over 4 intense weeks, was comprehensive and punitive. It secured not just a financial payment but a judicial mandate for change. Officer Derek Finch was dismissed from the San Diego Police Department for cause, citing unlawful arrest, malicious conduct, and violation of departmental policy. This for-cause termination stripped him of his pension and rendered him permanently ineligible for law enforcement employment in any jurisdiction. Lieutenant Marcus Harris received a 7-month unpaid suspension and was permanently demoted to a non-supervisory training role. His record included a formal finding of willful negligence for overriding the EWS warnings related to Finch. This was the core victory. The settlement required the San Diego Police Department to submit to a federally monitored consent decree for a period of 5 years. The decree mandated the early warning system could no longer be overridden by supervisors. Any flagged officer was automatically placed on mandatory retraining and temporary non-patrol duty. A civilian oversight board was granted access to a random sample of body camera footage for auditing stops that did not result in arrests, specifically looking for evidence of pretextual stops. Mandatory, recurring training on the Fourth Amendment and implicit bias, utilizing the Vance video as the primary teaching material for what constitutes an illegal stop. The city fought hard on the financial amount, arguing that a payment over $600,000 would be politically toxic. Aaliyah's team countered with the full range of potential damages and the cost of the DOJ investigation. The final figure settled precisely at $895,000, a number large enough to be an unmistakable headline, yet manageable enough for the city council to stomach in exchange for avoiding a trial. Officer Finch's termination was the immediate collateral damage. He attempted to appeal, but his union representative, after watching the viral video for the 10th time, declined representation, stating curtly, "The footage offers no defense. You arrested a judge for taking out the trash. The error is not procedural, it is absolute." Aaliyah Vance immediately announced that she would donate the entire $895,000 settlement. She established the Fourth Amendment Justice Fund, dedicated to providing pro bono legal services for individuals in San Diego who face charges resulting from pretextual or biased stops, ensuring that the price of injustice funded justice itself. In her only public statement following the settlement, Aaliyah stood before the media, not in her judicial robes, but in a simple business suit. Her expression was calm, controlled, and absolute. She did not express anger or triumph. She expressed judicial finality. The law must apply to everyone, equally. That night, I wasn't acting as a judge. I was acting as a citizen asserting her constitutional rights. If my credentials were required to force compliance with the Constitution, then the system is fundamentally broken, and that breakdown is due to a failure of leadership and training. The $895K settlement is simply the tax the city is required to pay for refusing to fix the bias in its officers' eyes. My compensation is the guarantee that the Vance Protocol will protect thousands of citizens who do not have a federal seal to defend them. The power of the statement was in its cold, precise truth. It was the final, devastating ruling from the federal bench, delivered directly to the city's conscience. Aaliyah Vance returned to the bench, her authority absolute. But the victory, however sweeping, came with a profound personal cost. The trauma did not vanish with the settlement check. The most insidious change was the loss of trust in sanctuary. Her home, once the absolute refuge from the grueling demands of the courtroom, was now forever associated with the cold steel of handcuffs and the profound, public humiliation of an illegal arrest. Every time she stepped onto her driveway, every time she heard a car slow down on her street, the adrenaline spiked. She installed triple-lock doors and reinforced the windows. The security camera, the Aaliyah Eye, which had saved her career, was now a constant, necessary reminder that danger could be manufactured at any moment, even just beyond her front door. Her relationship with her neighborhood changed. Neighbors, who had previously been quiet acquaintances, now saw her as a symbol. She was no longer just Aaliyah, she was the plaintiff, the target, the symbol. The experience profoundly altered her judicial philosophy. Her rulings became sharper, more incisive, particularly in cases involving police testimony and qualified immunity. She knew, firsthand, how simple it was for an officer to manufacture reasonable suspicion out of nothing but prejudice. In one notable post-settlement ruling, she rejected a police search warrant based on an officer's claim of furtive movement in a vehicle. Her opinion, now cited widely, included a final, devastating footnote. A finding of reasonable suspicion cannot be predicated upon an officer's subjective, racially motivated hunch. This court holds that the legal standard requires objective, articulable facts, tested against the reality that the assertion of one's constitutional rights is not, and shall never be, evidence of criminal activity. The reforms mandated by the consent decree continued to generate friction within the police department for years. The Vance Protocol was resisted, but the data slowly began to shift. Stops of black residents based solely on vehicle type or vague description dropped significantly. The use of the obstructing charge against motorists who simply asked for legal justification plummeted. The system, forced by a $895,000 judicial hammer blow, was beginning to bend toward justice. Aaliyah continued to put her recycling bin out every Tuesday night, the air cold and still, her posture unyielding. The act was no longer about a chore, it was a ritual of reclamation. She stood on the damp asphalt, the red marks long faded from her wrists, knowing that she had used her terrifying experience to protect every citizen who might not have the federal seal to defend them. The incident was not unique. Thousands of profiling incidents happen every night. This one just happened to be documented, and the victim had the power to make the consequences unignorable. The $895,000 was the price of the city's shame, but the value of the systemic change it forced upon the state, the slow, difficult, and necessary journey toward equal protection under the law, was truly beyond measure. Justice wasn't just served in the courtroom, it was served on a cold, damp Tuesday night, at the end of a suburban driveway, captured by a camera that refused to blink.